Hi everyone! Welcome back to Goodnight Stories. My name is Lyra, and I will be your guide into whatever book we decide to read tonight. From young readers to young adult novels, my hope is to give you a comfortable space to listen to a story while you work or doze. So, sit back, relax, grab a cup of tea. Tonight, we start Kathryn Lasky's The Siege, the fourth book in the Guardians of Ga'Hoole series. Prologue. Sparks flew off his beak as the owl, mad with rage, careened through the night sky. I must find water. I must find water. This mask will melt my eyes. Glock's blood on my brother's gizzard. The barn owl screeched as his glowing beak sliced the blackness of the night. The curse, the worst that an owl could say, seemed to relieve Clud of the terrible feelings that stormed within him. But hate still fed him. Fed his flight, fed his desperate search for a cool pond in which to plunge his mask of molten metal. His singed feathers were set aflame by his brother Soren in a battle that had gone wrong, all wrong. Below, he spotted the glint of the moon off a smooth, liquid surface. Water! The huge barn owl banked and began to spiral downward. Soon, cool water. He had lost his beak in one battle. He had lost all of his face feathers in another. His ear slits had been scarred this time, but he still had one eye, and most important, he still had his hatred. Clud fed and coddled his hatred as a mother owl fed and coddled her baby chicks. Thank Glocks he could still hate. Chapter 1. The Pilgrim. The brown fish owl looked up and blinked. The red comet had passed by for the last time nearly 3 months before. What could this glowing point in the sky be? It was hurtling towards the lake at an alarming speed. Great Glocks! It was screeching the most horrid, foulest oaths imaginable. The brown fish owl stepped farther out on the sycamore branch that extended over the lake. If this were not a fish owl, it would need rescuing. Most species of owls, save for fish owls or eagle owls, were completely helpless in the water. The brown fish owl began to spread his wings and was ready to flap them quickly for a power takeoff. Within the sliver of a second before he heard the splash, he was off. There was a sizzling sound as Clud hit the water, and then there were wisps of steam. Simon, the brown fish owl, had never seen anything like this. An owl glowing like a coal from a forest fire, plunging into the pond. Was it a collier owl? The colliers would know better. Remarkable as it seemed, a collier owl could do its work without ever getting burned. The brown fish owl grabbed the mysterious owl with his talons just in time, but his gizzard went cold as he saw the owl's face, a mangled deformity of molten metal and feathers. What was this? Well, better not worry. Now, at least it was alive, and as a pilgrim owl of the Gloxian Brotherhood of the Northern Kingdoms, Simon's duties was not to question, nor convert, nor preach, but simply to help, give solace, peace, and love. This owl seemed sorely in need of all, and this was precisely why the brothers took seasons away from their retreat and study to go out into the world and fulfill their sacred obligation. The brother superior often said, to study too much in retreat can become an inexcusable indulgence, but behooves us to share what we have learned, to practice in administering to others what we have gathered from our experience with books. This was Pilgrim Simon's first season of pilgriming, and this seemed to be his first big challenge. The burned owl would need tending, no doubt about it. Restoring fallen owlets to nests, making peace between warring factions of crows. The Gloxian brothers were among the few owls who could speak sense to crows. All that was nothing compared to this. It would take all of Simon's medicinal and herbal knowledge to fix up this poor owl. Easy there, fellow. Simon spoke in a low, soothing voice as he helped the wounded owl into the hollow of the sycamore. We're going to fix you up just fine. This was when Simon could have used a nest-made snake or two. What a luxury they had been back at the retreat. in the northern kingdoms. But here the pilgrims were charged to live simply, to avail themselves of the blind snakes that tended so many owls' nests. Keeping them free of vermin was not deemed appropriate for the pilgrim owls who were dedicated to service. They had been instructed to live as sparely as possible. Simon would have to go out and dig the medicinal worms himself. Leeches were the best for healing these kind of wounds, and being a fish owl, he was fairly adept at leech gathering. As soon as Simon had Clud arranged in the hollow on a soft bed made of down plucked from his own breast and a combination of mosses, he set out to gather the leeches. As he flew to a corner of the lake that was rich with leeches, he reflected on how this owl, which might be a barn owl, had fought when he had tried to preen him. This was very odd. He had never known an owl who had resisted being preened. This owl's feathers were a dirty, tangled mess. That he could have flown at all was amazing. Smooth flight depended on smooth feathers. On every flight feather there was tiny, almost invisible hooks or barbules that locked together to produce an even surface over which the air could glide. This owl's barbules had become unhooked in the worst way. They needed to be lined up and smoothed out again, but when Simon had first tried, the owl had pulled away. Odd. Very odd. Simon returned in a short while with a beak full of leeches and began placing them around the curled edges of the strange metal mask that had melted over most of the owl's face. He didn't dare try to remove it. Upon closer examination, Simon was sure that this was a barn owl, an exceptionally large one at that. With patches of soaked moss, he squeezed drops of water into the owl's beak. Occasionally the owl's eye would flutter open, but he was clearly delirious. In this state he spewed a nearly constant stream of curses, laced with tirades of vengeance and death addressed to some creature he called Soren. Day and night Simon treated the strange barn owl, changing the leeches, squeezing drops of water beneath the twisted piece of metal that was where a beak must once have been. The owl's agitation calmed, the ranctious curses fewer. Most thankfully, for the brothers of Glocks were a gentle order who eschewed fighting. For 2 days the barn owl had slept long, uninterrupted stretches, and now on the third day his eyes blinked open. Simon could tell that he was fully conscious at last, but the first words out of that metallic beak shocked the pilgrim brown fish owl, almost as much as the curses had. "You are not a pure one." "A pure one? What in the name of Glocks is this owl talking about?" Forgive me, but I am afraid I do not understand what you're talking about," said Simon. Clud blinked. "You should be afraid." "Never mind. I suppose I must thank you." "Oh, don't suppose anything. You need not thank me. I am a pilgrim. I am merely doing my Glocksian duty." "Duty to what?" "Duty to our species." "You are not of my species," Clud barked with a ferocity that shocked the fish owl. "I'm a barn owl, Tyto alba. You are," Clud seemed to sniff, "judging from your stink, a fish owl, not my species." "Well, I was speaking generally, of course. My Glocksian duty extends to all owlkind." Clud responded with a low, growlish hoot and shut his eye. "I'll leave you now," said Simon. "If you're going hunting, I would prefer red meat to fish, vole to be precise." Yes, I'll do my best. I'm sure you'll be feeling better as soon as I get you some meat." Clud glared at the brown fish owl. "You can be sure of nothing with me. Glocks, what an ugly owl. Flattish head, muddled color, not quite brown, not quite gray or white. Miserable little ear tufts. It doesn't get much uglier than a brown fish owl, that's for sure." Clud, however, thought he had heard of these pilgrim-type owls. Might as well learn a bit more. "So you say you're a pilgrim. Where are you from?" Simon was delighted that the barn owl was taking any notice at all. "The northern kingdoms." This interested Clud. He had heard of the northern kingdoms. That was where the ancient and brilliant owl Easelribe, whom he had almost captured, had come from. It was because of Easelribe that he had nearly died in this last battle. I thought the northern kingdoms were known for their warriors, not pilgrims. Owls of the northern kingdoms are very fierce, but one can be fierce in love and in peace, as well as in hatred and in battle. Glocks, this owl fricked him off. Frinked him off. Made him want to yarp a dozen pellets right in his ugly face. I see, Claude said. But of course he didn't see it all. Still, sometimes diplomacy was necessary. And this was what Claude considered a diplomatic response to an owl that made his gizzard turn green. Well, why don't you fly off and get me some good red meat? Nice and furry, good bones. My gizzard needs something to grind. And I need time to think. The Northern Kingdoms. The mere mention of them by the disgusting brown fish owl had set Claude's mind ablaze. He had to plan carefully now. The capture of the old whiskered screech-owl Easelribe had failed miserably. Of course, one hardly could have called it a great scheme. No, the great scheme had been to build a force large enough to lay siege to St. Agulus Academy for Orphaned Owls, better known as St. Aggies. The academy had been snatching owlets for years and training them to mine flecks, among other things. With flecks, one could create weapons of unbelievable power. Not simply weapons that killed, but weapons that could warp the minds of owls. St. Aggies had the largest known supply of flecks, but the owls of St. Aggies didn't know what to do with them. Still ignorant as they were, they had found the stronghold of the Pure Ones in the castle ruins and tried to make off with the owlets that Claude and scores of Tytos had captured. The Pure Ones, of course, fought back to recover what was, in their minds, rightfully theirs. This resulted in the Great Downing. Scores of baby owls dropped while two powerful and lawless forces battled it out. And it was the Great Downing that had alerted the owl world, in particular, those noble owls known as the Guardians of Ga'Hoole, who rose in the darkness of the night from the great Ga'Hoole tree, that there was something out there more fearful than St. Aggies. Before the Great Downing, the organization of the Pure Ones had been secret, and this state afforded them valuable time and opportunity to build their forces and develop their strategies. The Great Downing had brought the Ga'Hoolean owls out in full force, and most significantly, it had brought out the legendary warrior from the northern kingdoms, known there as Lies of Keel, and now in the southern kingdoms as Easelribe. But it was not Lies of Keel, the warrior, who had interested Claude. It was Easelribe, the scholar. It was said that this owl had the deepest knowledge of everything, from weather to fire to the very elements of life and the earth. This owl best understood the lurking powers of flecks. So, when the Pure Ones had lost the owlets, their source for new owl power, Claude had abruptly decided to change tactics. The capture of one owl like Easelribe would be worth more than 100 baby owls. The only way he could think of capturing the old one was through a devil's triangle. By placing 3 bags of flecks in 3 different trees to form a triangle, Claude had laid a trap that had ensnared the old whiskered screech by causing massive disruptions to his powers of navigation. The flecks set up a magnetic field. That this field had been broken was not only unexpected, but disastrous, and it had been broken. Other owls had come to Easelribe's rescue. They had snapped the power of this field, as if it had been no more than a brittle twig. Higher magnetics. Easelribe knew these dark sciences, and that was why Claude had wanted him. There had been a fierce battle with the owls who had come to rescue Easelribe. Much to Claude's horror, one of them had been his own baby brother, Soren, whom he had pushed out of the family's nest when Soren was an owlet too young to fly. At the time, Claude thought that he had been delivering up his younger brother to the Grand Tyto, most pure, for that had been the requirement, to sacrifice a family member and thus assure one's own admission to the highest ranks of the Pure Ones. But something had gone wrong. St. Aggies had shown up and taken his brother. Now this very brother had nearly killed him, and not only had the Pure Ones had their new recruits stolen from them, not only had they lost Easelribe, but their stronghold had been discovered. They needed to find a new place to roost, a headquarters from which to plan their war for supremacy. Well, no need to think about all that now. There were other more important matters, like higher magnetics. All this time, Claude thought, I have dreamed of flecks, of controlling the owl universe and making it pure. I dreamed of conquering St. Aggies, with great reservoirs of flecks and its thousands of owls to mine them. Then I dreamed of capturing Easelribe, but now I know what I must do. I must lay siege to the great tree on this island of Hoole, in the middle of the sea Hoolemere. Yes, the great Gahul tree must be ours. With its secrets of fire and magnetics, with its warriors and its scholars, it must be ours. I shall bide my time. I shall gain my strength. I shall find my scattered army, and then we shall rise 1,000 times more powerful than we ever were against the guardians of Gahul. A nice plump vole for you, sir. Strong bones and plenty of fur. Its winter pelt is fully grown. That should set your gizzard grinding just fine. The brown fish owl, Pilgrim, had just returned. Yes, and so will you, Pilgrim. For Clud had decided that upon regaining his strength he would kill this owl immediately. His own survival must remain a secret for some time if all his plans were to work. Yes, by tomorrow, with the vole's bones like grist in his gizzard, he would be ready to kill the stinking brown fish owl. Clud, the best of the killers, was patient. Chapter 2. The Watcher in the Woods. Some might have thought her a scroom, a ghost owl, but she was not. Her feathers had turned a misty grey colour with spots of white. She was, indeed, a spotted owl, but an odd one. She had perched in a tree not far from the sycamore. Her wings, slightly crippled, made long flights difficult, and when she did fly, her path was often crooked. None the less, she went out scouting every day. She was almost invisible to the others in Umballa. When they saw her, which was seldom, they called her Mist. But although she was not often seen, she seemed to see all. When she sensed danger or saw something disturbing, she flew to the eagles with whom she shared a nest. In the past, there had been a slip-gizzle to keep an eye on such things. But since the barred owl, whom had watched in the borderlands between the Beaks and Umballa, had been murdered, there had been no one. Now the owl called Mist sensed that there was great peril nearby. She had watched the strange sight a few nights before, when a smoldering owl had plunged into the lake. She had seen the pilgrim owl rescue it, and had been amazed when she observed the pilgrim flying out to fetch leashes. She could not imagine how that owl had survived its plunge, let alone the embers that encrusted its face. But it must have, for the next day she had seen the good pilgrim go out hunting, and had heard him fretting over finding a vole. He was muttering to himself in a taunt voice that the injured owl had demanded meat and not fish. Miss could not imagine how that owl could be so demanding of the pilgrim who had saved his life. And now she watched as the pilgrim went out several times each day, and always for red meat, rat, vole, squirrel, but never fish. She had become more and more curious about the owl recovering in the hollow of the sycamore. How close did she dare come? Most animals in the forest, especially owls, never really saw her. They looked through her. To them she appeared like fog or mist, but even when they did see her, they never seemed to recognize her as an owl, or as any creature they knew. And this was fine with her. The only ones who did know her were the eagles with whom she lived, Zan and Streak. So she crept forward on the branch of the fir tree where she perched. It was a short flight to the spruce that grew next to the sycamore where the wounded owl was recovering. A few minutes later, she lighted down onto the spruce. There was one branch that extended farther than the others and nearly touched the sycamore. From this branch she had a perfect view into the hollow where the wounded owl rested. The spotted owl gasped at what she saw. The injured owl was immense, and his face was hidden behind a metal mask that made him appear horrifyingly brutal. She felt her gizzard twitch, and a slow dread begin to build. She must get back to the eagles. There was something about this owl that was more evil than anything she had ever seen. But just then she heard the approach of the pilgrim. Suddenly, the entire world seemed to turn into a blizzard of bloody feathers. A terrible shriek shattered the forest, and then it was over. In a matter of seconds, the brown fish owl lay dead on the forest floor. One wing ripped off, his head nearly split open. As the blackness of the night gathered in the forest, the huge owl with the metal mask raised its wings up, then flapped and lifted into the sky. The spotted owl's gizzard turned to ice as the owl settled on the very same limb upon which she perched. She had survived so much. Was she now to die in the talons of this monster? The monster turned toward her. The spotted owl dared not breathe. Never had she perched this close to an owl and remained imperceptible. The monster blinked. Incredible. He sees straight through me. I am indeed missed. The branch shook as Clud flapped his wings again and rose into the night to seek his pure ones. With this murder finished, the time for revenge had arrived. Vengeance and glory would be his. His gizzard quivered in exultation. A silent scream filled his brain. Clud rules supreme. Chapter 3. At the Great Gahul Tree. The big limbs of the great Gahul tree shook with the blasts from the first winter's gale. It was the season of the white rain, when the vines that hung from the tree turned to glistening ivory. The best of the milkberries had all been harvested weeks before in the time of the copper rose rain, when the vines were burnished a deep copper rose color. The weather chaw to which Soren belonged had just returned from an interpretation flight led by Iselrib, captain of the chaw. It had been Iselrib's first flight since his rescue from the Devil's Triangle, and it had been wonderful, a loud, boisterous mission with plenty of wet poop jokes and singing. But they had come back with good information, despite Odalis's dire prediction that they would learn nothing if they didn't stop all the gleeking about. Gleeking was the owl word for messing around, and not being serious. Some trawl leaders, such as Strixstrom, never permitted such gleeking, but Iselrib was different. He believed that gleeking was good, building trust and fellowship. Odalissa, however, a serious and proper young spotted owl, abhorred gleeking about in general, and wet poop jokes in particular. It was a never-ending debate between her and Soren. Soren, I just don't believe that exchanging wet poop jokes with seagulls should be part of any mission. Odalus and Soren, both members of the Weatherchaw, perched on a branch just outside the dining hall, waiting for Matron to announce that break-light was ready. Break-light was the meal the owls enjoyed at the end of the night, just before the break of dawn. After this, they would sleep for the rest of the daylight hours until the evening shadows began to creep over the earth and darken the sky. You can learn a lot from seagulls, Odalissa, Soren was saying. I beg to differ. All the churning and quaffing and giggling over this pathetic humor interrupts the pressure front vibrations. Spotted owls were known for their extreme sensitivities to atmospheric pressure that came with changes in the weather. Well, you picked up on the fact that a blizzard was behind this gale, and look, it's starting to snow now. So I don't see how it damaged your prediction. Soren, I could have predicted a lot more precisely when and how much snow we would be getting if there hadn't been all that leaking about. Also, I just don't find wet poop jokes funny. As owls, we should be proud of our digestive systems and our unique manner of eliminating waste. Oh, it's yarping for Glock's sake. A large great grey owl named Twilight had just lighted down on to the branch next to them. Twilight was one of Soren's closest friends. It's not simply yarping, Twilight. That we pack the bones and fur of our waste into neat little packets for excretion is quite extraordinary in the bird kingdom. That so little of our waste is liquid is exceptional. Yarping pellets through our mouths is magnificent, said Odalissa. Seen one pellet, seen them all, Twilight growled. I'm getting cold, Soren said. When is Breaklight going to be ready? I, for one, am ready for something hot. Before a mission, the owls of the Weatherchaw were not permitted to eat their food cooked. Iselrib insisted that they eat their food raw with all the hair, as he called it, on the meat. Of course, the owls of the Gahul tree were special in that they often ate cooked food. Most owls ate their food raw and bloody because, unlike the owls of the great tree, they did not possess the extensive knowledge of fire. The owls of the great Gahul tree enjoyed a civilization unrivaled by any of the other kingdoms of owls. With their knowledge, they tried to protect the lives of owls in other kingdoms. Lately, however, the dangers had increased alarmingly. Not the least of these dangers were the evil owls of St. Agulus Academy for Orphan Owls, where Soren had once been imprisoned. At St. Aggie's he had met his best friend Gylfie and Alfowl, and now there was an even more destructive group, the Pure Ones. It had been on the mission to rescue Iselrib that Soren had discovered that his own brother, Clud, was the leader of this group. Matron, a botchy barred owl, A bunchy barred owl, poked her beak out of the opening near the branch where Soren and the others perched. "Bright light," she announced cheerfully. "Last," Soren said. "Oh, bats! I smell roasted bat wings." Gylfi suddenly swooped in. "Where have you been?" Soren turned to the elf owl. "Helping Octavia in the library," she replied. "Octavia in the library? Why?" Soren asked. "Orders from the top, I guess. We were supposed to organize all the books on higher magnetics and flex." Soren felt his gizzard lurch. He would never get used to hearing the word flex. But Octavia? Why Octavia? What use is a blind snake in the library? No offense, Miss P. Oh. But Octavia? Why Octavia? What use is a blind snake in the library? No offense, Miss P. Odalissa asked as they crowded around Miss Plithiver, another blind snake. "None taken, dear," the rosy-colored snake replied. For centuries, blind snakes had served as maids in the nests of owls, keeping them free of vermin and pests. In the great Gahul tree, they served in other tasks as well. Among such tasks were providing the dining tables upon which the owls ate. They could easily and quickly extend their bodies to accommodate more dinners. Answering Odalissa's question, Gylfi replied, "Why Octavia? Well, she might be blind, but she has served Easelrive for so long that she knows which books he wants on the special reserves shelf for higher magnetics, and it was too much work for just the book matron. She doesn't know the collection as well as Octavia, at least not these books. But then, of course, Dewlap came in and started bossing us all around." There was a sigh from the owls. Dewlap was the most boring teacher, or ribe, of the great Gahul tree. "What's she doing in the library?" Soren asked. "Higher magnetics has nothing to do with the stuff she teaches." Odalissa plumped up her feathers. "Oh, never mind. I am just so excited about studying higher magnetics. I can't tell you." "Then don't." "Then don't," said Twilight. "Yes, spare us learned one," Gylfi said under her breath, in a barely audible whisper to Soren, who laughed. Odalissa was a very smart owl. No one would deny that. She had been the one to figure out how the Devil's Triangle worked and how to destroy it with fire, and she knew of the protective qualities of moon metal that guarded against the hazards of magnetic flex. But she wasn't shy about flaunting her knowledge, and sometimes it became boring, especially now as she began talking about her long lists of distinguished relatives who were all scholars, in particular the genius, long gone, great-great-great-great-aunt of her, Strix Amarilla, who had written countless scientific books. It was always Strix Amarilla this or Strix Amarilla that. After a little while, the other owls at Miss P's table ignored her and went on with their own conversations. Gylfi again turned to Soren and whispered in his ear, "You noticed that Easelrive and none of the other Parliament members are here?" Soren nodded. "Well, big doings," Gylfi said, then blinked with one eye. Soren felt a surge of excitement. Gylfi must be on to something. Soren needed a distraction. Life had been, well, not quite the same since the appalling revelation that his own brother had trapped Easelrive in the Devil's Triangle, and his own brother had vowed to kill him. Soren spent entirely too much time remembering those dreadful images of Clud flying off. His face molted as the hot metal mass melted, screaming, "Death to the impure, death to Soren. My own brother. My very own brother is Metalbeak, and he wants to kill me." After break-light, the owls departed the dining hall and made their way back to their respective hollows. Outside the great tree, the blizzard lashed. Gale-force winds had turned the sky white. It had been on a night like this, in the thick of a blizzard, that Soren, Gylfi, Twilight, and Dicker had first arrived at the great tree. Now, as soon as the four friends and Soren's sister Eglantine were alone, Gylfi spoke in a low voice. "As I said to Soren at break-light, something big is going on." "How do you know?" Digger asked. Not one of the Parliament members was in the dining hall. There's an important meeting taking place." "Getting ready for war, I bet," Twilight said. "I'll bet they'll put us each in charge of a division." "It's not war, Twilight. Hate to disappoint you," Gylfi said. Twilight was disappointed. He loved fighting, and with his amazing quickness and ferocity, Twilight had proved that he had no equal. No war," repeated Gylfi. "It's higher magnetics." "Oh, for Glox's sake," Twilight growled. "How boring. As if we don't get enough of HM, as she calls it, from Odalissa all the time." "It's important, Twilight. We have to learn about this stuff," Digger said. "That's just the problem," Gylfi said in a low hiss. This stuff is Sproink. Sproink, the three other owls had said at once. What's Sproink? Soren asked. Sproink is forbidden knowledge, said Gylfi. There was a deep silence and then a hollow. Forbidden knowledge? No, Gylfi, Soren said. You have to be wrong. Nothing is Sproink in the great Gohul tree. That's just not the Guardian's way. They would never forbid knowledge. They only want us to learn. Maybe not forbidden forever, but at least some things are Sproink for right now, she replied. Well, I don't like that, Soren said firmly. I'm completely against things being declared Sproink. Me too, Twilight said. Digger blinked, and then in that slow way he had of speaking when he was considering a problem, he said, Yes, I think it's awful when they keep knowledge from young owls. Just suppose that Odalissa had not been permitted to read that book about the Devil's Triangle. We might never have been able to free Isilride. I think we should go tell them that this is all wrong, Eglantine spoke up for the first time. Before we do anything, Soren said now in a firm voice, I think that we have to find out for sure. To the roots, Soren? Gylfi asked. That's how you found out, isn't it, Gylfi? Soren asked. Gylfi nodded. She was a bit embarrassed, for this was an acknowledgment that she had been engaged in the less than admirable activity of eavesdropping on the Parliament. Thousands of inner passages wound their way through the great Gohul tree, and some months before, Gylfi, who often had trouble sleeping and would rise for a wander through the tree, had discovered a place deep in the roots where there was a strange phenomenon. Something happened to the timber at a certain point so that the sounds coming from the owl's parliament chamber resonated within the roots. Entering the root structure itself was a challenge, for the roots were huge and tangled, but Soren and his friends had found it an ideal place where they could listen. Oh, I'm so excited, Eglantine was nearly hopping up and down. I've heard you talk about going to the roots, but I've never been there. I've been dying to go. There was a sudden silence as one of the four owls exchanged glances. You're not thinking of leaving me out. You better not leave me out. No fair, Eglantine said in a desperate voice. I'm not sure, Eglantine, Soren said. I mean, first of all, you would have to promise not to tell Primrose. Primrose, a pygmy owl, was Eglantine's best friend, and she told her everything. I won't, I promise. Listen, if it hadn't been for me, none of this stuff with higher magnetics would have started, Eglantine said. This was true, if it hadn't been for Eglantine, who had been captured by the Pure Ones, imprisoned in the stone crypt of a ruined castle, and exposed to the destructive powers of the Flex, none of this would have happened. Well, all right, Soren finally said, but not a word of this to anyone, promise? Promise, the young barn owl nodded her lovely heart-shaped face solemnly. Chapter 4. Sprink on your sprink. I cannot believe that teaching young and impressionable owls about such matters can really be helpful in the long run. Higher magnetics is a strange business. We ourselves have only begun to understand it all. Dulip, the Gohulology Ribe, was speaking. The 5 young owls were perched among the roots, listening to the Parliament's debate. Soren was ready to explode. Of course, higher magnetics was a strange business, especially compared to Gohulology, which was one of the most boring studies in Chaws of the Great Gohul Tree. Gohulology was important, for it taught the processes of the tree itself and how to best keep the environment healthy and thriving, but it was also dull. In this debate, Dewlap and Elvin, another Ribe, were on the Sprunk side, while Isilride and Bubbo, the blacksmith at the Great Gohul Tree, were on the anti-Sprunk side. Strixstronum was undecided. Suddenly the 5 young owls were aware of another presence. They felt a shadow slide over them in the darkest of the places within the tree, and they froze. Then all of them together flipped their heads around. It was Odalissa. What was she doing here? Soren was furious. Rock drops, he thought. Then Twilight beaked silently the words they were all thinking. This really frinks me off. Rock drops and frinks were 2 of the worst curse words an owl could say. There was only one worse, sprink, but no one ever said that. Not even Twilight. Say these words in the dining hollow and you were out in a flash, but Odalissa seemed unrattled. She merely lifted a talon to her beak to warn Twilight not to make any noise. Soren settled back down. There was absolutely nothing he could do about this now. They might as well just listen as the debate continued. Higher magnetics is not a science, Dewlap was saying. It's dark magic, one of the shadow arts, and that book, Flecacia and Other Disorders of the Gizzard, says as much. It must instantly be removed from the shelves. Wrong! A voice boomed and sent the roots quivering so hard that little Gilfy nearly fell from her perch. It was Easelribe speaking. First, with all due respect to Dewlap, I must take issue with the term dark magic. You use it in a derisive manner, and if something that is dark and is negative, as if something that is dark is negative. How can darkness in our world of owls ever be thought of as negative, something less good? For it is not in the darkness that we come alive. For is it not in the darkness that we come alive, that we rise in the night to fly, to hunt, to find, to explore, to defend, and to challenge? It is in darkness that our true nobility begins to bloom. Like the flowers that open to the sunshine, we open to the dark. So let us hear no more of such expressions as dark magic. It is neither dark nor is it magic. It is science, a science that we do not fully understand. All right, we need an explanation, Odalissa, Soren demanded when they were back in the hollow. You followed us. Who gave you permission? But Odalissa cut him off. Who gave you permission to eavesdrop? She shot back. Well, no matter. How come you're following us around? I have as much right to as anyone. I don't want to be left out. I flew with you to rescue Easelribe. You know that's true. And who was it who figured out the Devil's Triangle? Tell me that. And who knew about moon metal? Tell me that. Not to mention the fact that it was I who knew that fire destroyed magnetic properties. So who has more right to know about higher magnetics? Now it was Digger who stepped forward. You, he said simply. Odalissa breathed a sigh of relief. And, he paused, I honestly don't believe that one owl has more of a right than anyone else to know something. Isn't that what our objection to this whole sprunk thing is about? Our right to know? We should all be able to know. A stillness had fallen over the group. Now, tell us, what do you think is sprunk about higher magnetics, and why don't they want us to know about it? What are they scared of? I don't know, really. I think it probably has something to do with... She hesitated. Well, with what happened to Eglantine after the Great Downing, to her mind, to her gizzard. Was that different from what happened to Easelribe? Soren asked. Yes, I think so. Easelribe just lost his sense of direction. He couldn't navigate, but Eglantine, Odalissa turned to Eglantine. I couldn't feel. I was like stone, like those stone crypts they kept us in, Eglantine said. So why don't they want us to know about this? Soren asked. I'm not sure. Maybe because they don't know that much about it themselves, said Odalissa. So, said Soren, what do we do about all of this? We need to confront them, Twilight said. I'm not much for book learning, but I don't like the idea that someone can tell me I can't learn something. Makes me want to learn it all the more. But if we confront them, Gilfy said, we're back to the same old problem again. What's that? Asked Odalissa. Last time we listened in at the roots and found something out and wanted to say something about it, way back last summer, when we couldn't because then we would have to admit that we'd been eavesdropping, and we would get into really big trouble, said Gilfy. Odalissa blinked her eyes shut and kept them that way while she thought a moment. I see the problem. Then suddenly she opened her eyes. The amber light in them flickered with a new brightness. I have an idea. Remember that book that we were talking about? That book that had to be removed from the shelves? Flecacia and Other Disorders of the Gizzard? Yes, Soren replied. Well, what if I go to the library and ask the book matron to fetch it for me? Then we'll see what happens. This will be a test case, so to speak, said Odalissa. The other owls looked at one another. Odalissa was smart, and this was a very good idea. So it was planned that at as tween time neared, when the last drop of the day's sun began to vanish and the first shadows of twilight gathered, they would all go to the library, and Odalissa would request the forbidden book. Of course, they would not go in all at once. Soren and Gilfy would already be there, and Odalissa would arrive with Eglantine and Digger, It was decided that Twilight would not be there at all because he seldom was in the library. Now Soren wondered if Easelrive would be there, for he often was. What would he say when Odalissa requested the book? The whole idea of forbidden books sickened Soren. At St. Aggie's, all books were forbidden. Entry into the library was not permitted for any owl except Skench and Sporn, the brutal leaders of the academy. Academy, what a name! No one had learned anything there except how to become a slave and stop thinking. Soren and Gylfi could hardly concentrate on the weather charts they were studying in the Julian Weather Atlas. Easelrive was in the library, his usual uncommunicative self, sitting at his desk. The only sound that came from that desk was the crunching of the dried caterpillars that he munched while he read. He was the most inscrutable of the owls, and only rarely revealed anything that could be called emotion. Yet Soren was drawn to him. He loved the old whiskered screech, because it was Easelrive who had first looked upon him and seen him as more than a young orphaned barn owl, more than just an owl scarred by the horrors of St. Aggie's. Easelrive had seen Soren as a real, thinking owl who knew things not only through books and the information that the Ribes taught, but through his gizzard. Gizuition was, according to Easelrive, a kind of mysterious thinking beyond normal reasoning, by which an owl immediately perceived the truth. Gylfi gave Soren a nudge. Soren looked up. Odalissa had just entered the library with Eglantine, and suddenly Dewlap had appeared behind the circulation desk with the book matron. Soren felt his gizzard turn squishy. He saw Odalissa's feathers droop, as an owl's feathers do when he or she feels fear. She seemed to shrink. But then Soren watched and saw a fierce glint in the amber of her eyes. Odalissa's feathers seemed to puff up slightly, and she flew the short distance between where she had stood and the desk. Book matron, would you be so kind as to look for a book that I can't seem to find on the shelves? Certainly, dear. What is the title? Flacasia and Other Disorders of the Gizzard? Complete silence fell upon the library. It loomed up as thick as fog on a humid summer night. Soren lifted his eyes towards Easelrive, who was staring directly at Dewlap. His gaze bore into her like two fierce points of golden light. The book matron stammered. Let me go see if I can find it. Oh, no, book matron, Dewlap said. That is one of the books that has been temporarily removed from the shelves until certain decisions are made by the Parliament. Removing books? Decisions? Since when are there decisions about books I want to read? Odalissa drew herself up taller. Her feathers were now fully fluffed up. Odalissa's plumage had puffed to a degree that was most often associated with the posture of attack. She looked huge. There are plenty of other good books for you to read, my dear, Dewlap said in a soft voice. But I want to read that book, Odalissa replied. She paused a second. Strix Amarella, one of my distinguished ancestors, the renowned Weather Strix, who has written several books on atmospheric pressure and weather turbulations, mentioned it. Dewlap interrupted her. The book you have requested has nothing whatsoever to do with weather. That's possible, but you see, Strix Amarilla has a wide-ranging mind, and I think that she mentioned this book as referring to a possible connection between gizzard disorders as related to atmospheric pressure variations. So, Dewlap said, so I have a wide-ranging mind too. Now please, may I have the book? Glock's bless Strix Amarilla, Soren thought. If anyone had ever told him that he would be blessing Strix Amarilla, whom Odalissa brought up whenever possible, he would have said they were completely yoiks. I'm very sorry, my dear, but that is absolutely impossible. That book has been declared temporarily sprunk, Dewlap said firmly and turned to the list she had been making. Sprunk! Odalissa gasped. There was such emotion in her voice that every owl in the library looked up in genuine alarm. Yes, sprunk. A testy note had crept into Dewlap's voice. There is nothing more ordinary, less noble, more ignoble, less intelligent, more common, and completely vulgar than sprunking the written word, Odalissa sputtered. It is completely lower class. Well, the book is sprunk, Dewlap growled. Then Odalissa swelled up to twice her normal size. Well, sprink on your sprunk! Chapter 5. A Mission Most Stressful. She fainted. Dewlap actually fainted, Twilight said, with stunned disbelief. Yes, they've rushed her to the infirmary, Soren said. Soren, Gylfi, Twilight, Digger, and Eglantine swung their heads to Odalissa, who stood very still except for her quivering beak. "I don't regret a word, not even the you-know-what word. I shall not apologize. Sproinkins is very lower class, and it is against everything that the Guardians of Ga'Hoole are and everything they stand for. I don't care if I get a flint mop for this. I don't care if I get chaw-chopped." The other owls blinked in horror. To be chaw-chopped was not simply a flint mop, which was the owl's form of punishment. It was the ultimate humiliation that could befall an owl of Ga'Hoole. It meant being dropped for an indefinite period of time from one's chaw. 5 owls had returned to their hollow after the episode in the library. Odalissa had come too. They peered at her now in awe and wonder. This very prim and proper owl had not only said the worst curse word in the owl vocabulary, but she had spat it at a ribe. What would happen to her? They could only imagine. Suddenly, the Parliament matron poked her head into the hollow. "The lot of you are required in Parliament immediately." She did not sound pleased. "Except for Eglantine. She can stay." "Oh, Glocks," they all thought. "Why don't I get to go?" Eglantine asked in a quavering voice. "I want to be included." "You want to be included in a flint mop?" "You want to be included in a flint mop?" Twilight asked. "The last flint mop we got, if you recall, was having to bury pellets for dewlap for 3 days. You were excluded from that too, and believe me, you were lucky." As the owls made their way down to the Parliament hollow, Gylfie muttered, "Good Glocks, we're going to be burying pellets from now till summer." You didn't say the word, I did," Odalissa muttered. It just sort of came out. I was amazed myself." And then she quickly added, "But I'm still glad I said it." So secretly, they were all glad she had said it. There was something terribly wrong with this whole idea of sproinking. It did not fit in Soren's mind with the values of Ga'Hoole. It is a sprinky kind of thing, Soren thought. Yes, good for Odalissa. When they were ushered into the Parliament chamber, Dewlap was not there. Only Izelrib and Borin and his mate Baron, the 2 snowy owls who were the monarchs of the tree, were in attendance. And much to Soren's surprise, 2 other members of the Weatherchaw, Ruby, a short-eared owl and the best flyer in the chaw, and Soren's flight partner, Martin, a tiny northern saw-wheat. What's going on here? Why Ruby and Martin? Soren blinked at them in dismay, and they seemed equally puzzled as to why they had been called. Baron coughed several times to clear her throat and began to speak. "The 7 of you have been called here for a reason." Dread swam in all their gizzards. What was it to be? Burying pellets, or would they be chaw-chopped? Borin was now speaking. "The 7 of you combine an interesting array of talents," he paused, "as was proven in the extraordinary rescue of Izelrib." Izelrib nodded and seemed to fix his gaze on Soren. "Some have come to refer to you as the Chaw of Chaws." Soren almost gasped, and he felt his gizzard give a thrilled little twitch. "To get to the point," Borin continued, "your special talent as the Chaw of Chaws are now needed." One could have heard a blade of grass drop in the Parliament hollow. Glock, Soren thought. If Twilight pipes up about war and battle claws, I'll smack him. That's all the Great Grey ever thought about. But of course he was brilliant in battle. Then, as if Baron had read Soren's thought, she swung her head around and fixed Twilight with a piercing stare. The light from her yellow eyes was like sharp, bright golden needles. "In a sense, it is much more dangerous than war, although the stakes are high, for you could be killed." Whether Soren and his friends drew a breath for the next several seconds was questionable. "Your mission is to penetrate the St. Agulus' Academy for Orphaned Owls." "What?" Soren thought. Go back. He and Gylfie were horrified. The 2 owls almost fell off the Parliament perches. They were being asked to go back to the place they had attempted to destroy their personalities and their wills through the brutal process called moon blinking and moon scalding. "We have reason to believe that a dangerous group of owls, the ones that call themselves the Pure Ones, have possibly already infiltrated St. Agnes with the intention of capturing the immense scores of flecks. We had intelligence reports from Umballa that suggest this," said Baron. "Umballa," Digger said. "Isn't that where the slipgizzle was? Isn't that where the slipgizzle was? The barred owl? Was is right, Bourne said. As you know, he was killed. Over the last several months we have been cultivating a new slipgizzle. She is rather frail and quite eccentric. They call her Mist. She is perfectly suited for this work because through some odd accident, an almost terminal shock to her gizzard, she has lost all her coloration. Her feathers have turned a pale, almost foggy gray. Some might think she is a scroom, but she isn't. She does not fly well, but she has incredible powers of observation. The reports she has been sending out about the pure ones are most disturbing. Soren blinked. Why? They want flex. They want flex, Baron said, and St. Aggie's has the largest repository of flex in existence. But Miss thinks their interest extends beyond the flex, and that it is what we want you to find out. The two greatest threats to the Owl Kingdoms are St. Aggie's and the pure ones. The very idea of their being brought together in some sort of grand mischief is, Baron hesitated, gizzard-chilling, to put it mildly. Then Bourne resumed. So, you see how important the 7 of you are. We have faith in you. Now the question is, will you accept this mission? The owls were stunned. They had come in expecting a scolding or a flint mop, and instead they had been charged with the important mission. Soren felt Iselrive's gaze upon him, and Bourne began to speak. Soren and Gylfi, we realize that going back to St. Aggie's will be most difficult for you. Yes, Soren said slowly, but Bourne, won't they recognize us? Never, Baron said quickly. You were an owlet when you were there before. You were an owlet when you were there before. Your flight feathers had not fledged, nor had your face fledged white, and you were half your size. Gylfi, you too look quite different. And, Iselride began to speak for the first time, as you too well know, they're pretty stupid over there, these owls of St. Aggie's. He paused, but still, you'll need a cover story. A cover story? Martin asked. Yes, where you came from, why you were there, said Iselride. Odalissa raised her talon now to speak. Can we say something like we got sick of the great Gahul tree? No, snapped Iselride. They'll never believe you. You will raise their suspicions if they think you have anything to do with the great tree. You need to come from a place that they know very little about. Soren suddenly realized that Iselride had thought out this entire cover story. A place like what? Soren asked. A place like the Northern Kingdoms, said Iselride. Hold on a second. Digger had now raised a talon to speak. Iselride, Gylfi and I are desert owls. The chances of our coming from the Northern Kingdoms are just about 0. I haven't figured out, Iselride replied. I thought so, Soren blinked. Iselride continued, but he did not stand still on the perch. He began sweeping through the air. Last summer, before certain unfortunate incidents like the Great Downing and my own entrapment in the Devil's Triangle, I had commenced a set of weather interpretation experiments. My original intention had been to pick up information on atmospheric particles and subparticles as they related to the displays we call the aurora glaucora. Those magnificent colours in the summer sky when the entire night seems to pulsate with glorious lights. There was one last summer, as I recall, just around the time of my entrapment. Well, as often happens with scientific inquiry, one sets out to solve one problem, and quite by accident and happy surprise, one finds the answer to something entirely different. What I stumbled across was a new method for detecting distant Willowalls. Willowalls? Soren, Gylfi, Twilight, and Digger blurted out together. We know Willowalls, Gylfi said. Oh, you do you? It was a churr, a kind of owl chuckle embedded in Iselribe's voice. Yes, sir, Gylfi continued. On our journey to the great Gahul tree, we thought we were right on course for the island, when somehow we got sucked up in the ice narrows. Gylfi's voice began to dwindle off as the realization dawned. Now Iselribe really did laugh. He exclaimed. You're getting the picture. Yes, you see, that's how desert owls get to the Northern Kingdoms. They get sucked up there. For what is a willow wall but a sudden violent wind? He's so clever, Odalissa said, her voice drenched in awe. Winds become confused. It is essentially a thermal inversion, anomaly, or to make a long story short, you got your cover. You were sucked up, all of you, to the Northern Kingdoms, said Iselride. And then what? Soren said. Zorib stopped flying and lighted down beside Soren. Yes, and then what? Perhaps Gylfi and Digger, due to your desert background, did not find this cold place comfortable. And you other 5, you felt that there was too much clan warfare going on, one clan chief fighting against another. Very disorganized. Disorganized is a key word to use with the St. Aggie's owls. Oh yes, Gylfi exclaimed. If there was one thing that St. Aggie's prided itself on, it was organization and efficiency. Easelribe continued. You must say that you find clans an inefficient, cumbersome method of social and military organization. The old whiskered Screech paused. But if you just mention the northern kingdoms, the land of the great north waters, where I come from, every St. Aggie's owl will be intrigued. It is the last frontier to be conquered. If an owl has been there, every other owl is consumed with curiosity about what they have seen or experienced. And if you suggest that the northern kingdoms might be vulnerable, you shall be welcomed. But we can't fake it. I mean, we only got as far as the Ice Narrows. We don't know much about the northern kingdoms, Gylfi said. Will by the time I get through with you, Easelribe said bluntly. The 7 young owls exchanged nervous glances. Then Bourne began to speak. The 7 of you shall report to Easelribe's Hollow daily for the next week. During that time, Easelribe will give you intense tutorials on the history and culture of the northern kingdoms. Soren could sense Odalis's swelling with excitement over the prospect of yet another intellectual challenge. I cannot impress upon you too much the need for absolute secrecy. No one is to know about this mission. Talk of it must not go beyond these walls or the walls of Easelribe's Hollow, Bourne said. What about our own hollow? Soren asked. He was thinking of his sister, Eglantine. It would be hard to keep this from her. And when we are with Easelribe, won't the Ribes miss us for our usual classes? We have thought of that, Baron said. In regard to Eglantine, we have felt, as I am sure you have, that your hollow is a bit crowded with the 5 of you there. Primrose is knocking about in that hollow of hers all alone since that one masked owl from the Great Downing died of summer flux. Primrose has asked time and time again if Eglantine could move in with her since they are such close friends. I think Eglantine would like to, but she felt that you might be hurt. In truth, I think that she would be more comfortable with Primrose, who is somewhat closer to her age. I shall handle her move. I'll tell her that we have discussed it with you and you understand. Baron then turned to Odalissa, Ruby, and Martin. You 3 present another situation. We cannot go about moving everybody, or it will arouse suspicions. With your hollow mates, you will just have to be as discreet as possible. Now, as for your cover story for when you are gone, well, leave that to us. Easelribe is devising a so-called scientific weather experiment that is going to require the transfer of some equipment to an area on the other side of the Sea of Hulamir. The execution of this experiment necessitates the abilities of the members of a variety of chaws, right, Easelribe? The old whiskered Screech nodded. Bourne continued. I think that just about does it, then. You are dismissed for now, but please expect to report to Easelribe directly at tween time for your first history lesson on the northern kingdoms. The 7 owls started to leave the Parliament Hollow. Just a moment, young'uns, Easelribe called out. I have something here for Odalissa. She blinked and turned toward her chaw leader. I believe you were looking for this. In his 3-taloned foot that had been mangled in an ancient battle, Easelribe held out the book Flecasia and Other Disorders of the Gizzard. Odalissa gasped. Really? She blinked in disbelief as he extended his talons with the forbidden book. Yes, really, Odalissa. And I quite agree with you. Sprink on sprink. Baron gasped and Bourne winced, but they said nothing as the sound of the vulgar word pealed through the hollow. And that's where we will stop for the night. I hope everyone enjoyed listening. I hope you have a good evening and a good night.